Right now in Washington, it is 6:45 in the morning, and if Annelise Nielsen poked her head outside, it would be very cold. It is -1 degrees there right now, but it's always nice to check in with our buddy, who we haven't had the chance to see for the past couple of weeks. She's, of course, Sky News US correspondent there. But you don't need me to tell you it's cold. I just want to tell everyone back at home watching that you're absolutely freezing right now.
I'm very happy to be inside, yeah.
So the George Floyd case, this now finally gets to trial. You would imagine that unless everyone's found guilty and everyone gets the death penalty, riots will ensue. But there's a pretty high legal bar here for everyone but the main officer involved in this. Tell us what's about to unfold, at least in the process of this case in the next couple of days.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the weather, because the concern is that there are going to be riots. There's 2,000 National Guard on the ground in Minneapolis at the moment, and they've locked down the court complex to stop any kind of attacks on that building. But because it is winter and Minneapolis is known for being particularly cold, they are actually expecting any of that to hold off. And that was a big discussion around the timing of the trial, having it in March. Both sides were hoping to push it back to June or July, but the court said it needed to get a move on with this. Derek Chauvin, the main police officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, is the one who's up. This is all going to revolve around jury selection, and even that can be scuttled now because there's this push to have a third-degree murder charge put in place. Now, that's quite controversial because within the wording of this charge, it's that you acted in a way that was dangerous to others and likely to cause death. But saying others when it's an act that you're taking out on a specific person actually makes it quite a difficult charge to hold up. And it's actually the prosecution that's pushing for this. They want as many options before the jury as possible. Even though it's a lesser charge, it's not the defence asking for this to be put on the table. So there's obvious concern about who's going to be on this jury, what kind of vetting they're going to do, because in America they can question jurors on just about anything. And they've all had to already fill out personal questionnaires about their political leanings, things like that, so they can try to vet out anyone who comes into the room with an agenda.
But also it's this thing where, and I understand that all the jurors have had to, fill out 16 pages of questionnaires, including, what type of news do you watch, again, your political leanings and the rest. Everyone wants justice to be done here. There isn't a decent human being amongst us who doesn't say, well, hang on, let's deal with what's actually happened here. Let's make sure that there is the full weight of the law that happens here. But just back to that central issue where for a certain population of people, regardless of who they voted for, it's not going to be enough because it's not the first-degree murder charge. It doesn't have, even if he's found guilty, the same legal penalties, the same jail penalties that would exist with other things. So you do get the feeling, or I certainly get the feeling, that there is going to be a section of the population who, regardless of the result, regardless of the only way these things can be tested, are going to have an issue with the result.
Absolutely. And one of the things that the defence is expected to argue is that there were drugs in George Floyd's system that made him more vulnerable to having that suppression on his neck. That, of course, doesn't excuse any of that kind of behaviour, but it is also a legal precedent too that you take a victim as you find them. What we have seen discussion around, it's really interesting you point out that the idea of who you vote for, that's not normally a discussion you'd ever have in an Australian jury selection. But one of the things they want to preclude people for is if they attended the January 6th protests, even if they weren't involved in any of the rioting and looting at the Capitol that happened. So it really does start to fall down party lines.
What about the BLM riots? Is that in there as well? Is the BLM riots in there, or is it just January 6th? QAnon?
I haven't read the entire 16-page questionnaire myself, so I'm not 100% sure. But honestly, how do you find anyone who's not been impacted by the rioting in Minneapolis either? Because if you live there, surely you know someone who lost a business, you know someone who's had a negative impact with police, been at their own protests. So this is going to be a very complicated, drawn-out process getting this jury sworn in. All
right, now, time to make you dance, because questions I didn't tell you we were going to ask you here. Your observation of the American media, and are they becoming critical at all about how Biden presents himself to the press corps? He hasn't done a press conference in the 6 weeks since he's become president. It's all very well managed, and his press secretary's out there saying, oh, look, we might get round to it eventually. I remember when it was the Orange Man, they would have been screaming about such things, but look the other way because it's not the Orange Man. But are you starting to see some of the gripes in the media community about this?
They are starting to get a little more bolshy on Twitter, which I think is well overdue at this point. It's obviously a pretty hard thing at the moment for them to reset that mentality. There was a really good opinion piece in the New York Times about it, where they were saying that so many people have just been so locked into the Trump mentality of kind of being completely responsive all the time because he was putting so much out there that there was always something to respond to. And now they're kind of reverting back to that old school journalism where it's not going to be something to chase every single day from Twitter, but there is still work to be done. And I think one of the really big challenges is constantly saying, like, well, this is an emergency time, it's an unprecedented time, we have to lock in behind the president. That wasn't the approach that we had a few months ago, and that's not the job of journalists. We're here to criticise and to hold to account when it's necessary. So I think they are still resetting, and
Yeah, and look, you know, he literally has the ultimate power of the American presidency and is doing a lot with it, just pretending, oh, you know, he's putting out the fire from the other guy. That doesn't work. Annelise, we'll talk to you again next week, Rockstar. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
How good is she? Annelise Nielsen there, who gets up way too early to talk to us when it's way too cold.